Hey everybody, it's Alistair, aka That Pesky Social Worker, and thank you for clicking. Thank you for stopping in. So today I'm going to be talking about Mental Health Awareness Month, which is the month of May. Now I recognize that I'm kind of late to the party. May 1st ideally is when we should be talking about this, especially as a social worker and as a mental health clinician. But I chose today for a very specific reason because today is the anniversary of a very particular event in my life. So before I dig into any of the content, any of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about, I want to sort of give a little bit of a warning. So today's content is going to be heavy. It's going to be talking about mental health. It's going to be talking about depression, suicide, loss, grief, hospice, my own mental health struggles, and watercolor details on some traumatic things. So if you're in a raw place, maybe this is not the video for you to be watching right now. I just wanted to tag that ahead of time. So moving forward. Why did I choose the 23rd? So my sophomore year of high school, I actually lost a friend of mine. It was the first friend that I've lost at this point. About 5 people to suicide. And his name was Robbie. And I met Robbie when I was in high school, and I knew about him in middle school because the county that I grew up in is very small. Everybody kind of knows everybody, even if you didn't necessarily go to the same school. There were a few different elementary schools, then there were smaller elementary schools, and then there's only one high school. So eventually everybody gets to the same place. And Robbie and I were very different kinds of people. He was a football player, had always been super active, was super popular, dated cheerleaders, all of that. I was the nerdy, quiet guy that was reading books and being a band geek and being a techie in theater, doing stuff like that. And when I had my initial impression with Robbie, he and I didn't. We didn't even have an interaction. I was just being a crappy teenager and made a judgment. And I'm like, oh, you're just a dumb jock, and I'm smart because that's what you do when you're in high school. You try to find identity through labels and try to make yourself feel better through asinine things like an understanding of the English language and grammar. Like, just because I can diagram a sentence doesn't mean I'm better than anybody else. But again, when you're, 13, 14, 15, it's the little things you hang on to. And I actually got to know Robbie through summer school. So the way that our high school ran, if you wanted to get what's called an advanced diploma, you essentially couldn't take PE throughout the year. You had to take it during summer school. And that's how I met Robbie, was so we were both able to get those advanced diplomas. And we spent time walking on the track and getting to know each other, learning about his life and getting to know him. And he was just not, it was my first experience in getting outside of my expectations of somebody. And I wouldn't say that he and I became particularly close, but I became a person that when other people in his circle were not really understanding or he didn't really feel safe, like, I ended up being a lot of people's sort of repository for their secrets and things they didn't end up feeling comfortable telling other people. Surprise, surprise, I'm now a therapist. But he and I sort of maintained that relationship. And then following summer school, Robbie made some poor choices, and I'm not gonna dig into what they were because it's not important. It ended up having an impact on his academics and especially on him being able to play football. He was released from the team, and that was the biggest blow for him because football was his whole world. That was how he was going to make it. He wanted to go pro. He was a good player, and that was his life. That was how he coped with things, felt better. That was, for him, where he was able to work out all of his emotions was on the field. He didn't have to say anything to anybody. He could just run and hit heavy things or do a block or make a throw, or it was physical activity that helped him cope. And when that got taken away from him, that was a huge sense of identity. And it did not help that we had a few teachers that felt like they needed to ride him and remind him of his poor decisions and how stupid they were and discuss them in front of the class. And it really pissed me off that or not the professor, because he's not a professor, we're in high school, I'm thinking college, the teacher and I don't usually make a difference, but I have a real issue with Mr. Wheeler. If you see this, I think that how you handled everything was really fucked. You gave Robbie a raw deal. You were not nice to him. You kicked him out of class unnecessarily, and then you had the audacity to be the person that the yearbook approached and then talking about how what a wonderful, caring, giving person he is when you were constantly telling him that he was stupid and needed to get his act together. So if you see this, screw you. I don't really care. And so when Robbie got kicked off the football team, it really put his world into a tailspin, and he lost himself a lot. And we knew that he was struggling, but you don't really, until it happens in your life, it's not something that you really consider as an option. Losing someone to suicide, you don't. It doesn't enter your periphery. It doesn't even enter your reality. It's not until it happens, until you're affected by it personally. It's not really something that many people have an awareness over, and that is okay. And if you have not lost someone to suicide, I am really happy, and I hope that you never do. And it is my goal in life to make sure that we have less people that think that that is the option out. So I remember it was Friday, May 23rd, and it is now Saturday. So here we are all these years later. I'm looking at the calendar on my computer right now. Robbie had gotten kicked out of class by Mr. Wheeler for acting up pretty early on, and he was sitting in the hallway. And we had just been dismissed, and I was on my way home, and I was going outside where he was sitting, parked against the wall, and I I was going by him, and he said, "Hey, Alistair, I hope you have a good weekend. Take care of yourself, okay?" And like it landed on me kind of funny in the moment, but I didn't really think a whole lot of it. I'm like, oh, like he's just had a rough day, and I was like, well, you too, Robbie. Like I'll see you on Monday, and sort of went home. And about 3 hours later, I got a text message from my mom asking me to come downstairs because I was in my room, and she said, "Son, I've got some really hard news I need to tell you." And at the time, my mom was dating one of the local undertakers, and she said, "Steve just got a call, and Robbie's dead." And talk about stages of grief. I went into immediate denial. I was like, no, there's no way. There's no way that that's Robbie. I literally just talked to him like a couple of hours ago before I left school. Like he told me to have a good weekend and take care of myself. I talked to him like no, no. Like basically I was just saying no, and I was like it has to be his brother. There's no way. And my mom, God bless her, was very very gentle with me in this process of being like, no, Alistair, it's Robbie. He took his own life. And it hit hard, and I'm gonna get emotional during this, and I will not apologize, because I've struggled with my mental health since I was 12. I'm 28, so 16 years. 14 is when things got really ugly, and that's kind of the uphill battle that I've been struggling with for the last 14 years. And it really, really hit me because the previous year, had been, unbeknownst to most people, very suicidal. I was not happy. I was in a lot of emotional distress. There were a lot of very tumultuous things that were going on in my life. Um, to give a background on some of my stuff, so I grew up with parents that grew up in traumatizing households that perpetuated those patterns. And I had one parent who was really, really abused and had all of their boundaries violated and didn't really know another way to approach things. And I had another parent who also didn't have, good, healthy coping mechanisms structured for them. And at some point, both of them had substance use issues. One sort of resolved itself, the other one stayed persistent. My parents ended up divorcing, which is another issue. I've had family members that have been incarcerated. I have endured mental, emotional, and physical abuse. I hate to say that word because I know that there are people in my family that are going to see this and are going to feel some kind of way about it, but the reality is that this is my truth. This is what it was. And for a very long time as an adult, I was actually misdiagnosed. I was told that I had social anxiety disorder, then generalized anxiety disorder. I had major depressive disorder, not otherwise specified, which is you're sad, but we don't know why. You don't really fit criteria. And then I got major depressive proper. And then actually in September of 2015, I was hospitalized at a psychiatric inpatient facility because my depression was so bad. Um, and that was probably one of the most deflating experiences I've ever had because if you've never been in a psychiatric facility before, it's not what you think on a lot of levels. It's not One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but it's also not a place that really heals people. It's not. And I say that having been a patient working inpatient, and I say that having been a clinician working inpatient. The goal of inpatient ultimately is to keep you on a locked ward and to keep you safe and to keep you from harming yourself to the best of everybody's ability. And then once they deem you stable and no longer actively suicidal or actively trying to harm yourself or take your life or harm other people, then they let you go back out into the community. My understanding of what my inpatient experience was going to be was that I was going to be able to talk to a psychiatrist and talk to a nurse and talk to a therapist and be able to talk with my peers that were also there. The reality of what was available to me was I saw a psychiatrist twice the entire time I was there. I was there for 9 days. For 5 of those 9 days, I was not allowed outside. None of us were. They claimed that there was some construction going on. It was also a holiday weekend because Labor Day weekend, so all of that. And I never will forget. So I, for the first couple of days, was on CVO, which is short for constant visual observation, which basically means that you're viewed as an active risk. You're somebody that they need to be paying active attention to. And I never will forget, I woke up in the middle of the night, and part of being on CVO is that somebody has to be, if you're sitting, I mean, sleeping is different, but if they're sitting, they need to be within arm's reach of you, and basically it means that you're one to one. So if you're in the mental health world, you know what that means. If you're not, basically that means that you're someone that's been deemed that you need an individual with you at all times, one to one. Not because I'm particularly violent or aggressive, but because my suicidality and my depression were really, really bad, and I would openly talk about, like, yeah, no, I could turn this, and this, and like, that's the other thing, is that the ward was not nearly as safe as they thought it was, and they kind of had to reevaluate after I went through, because where there's a will, there's a way. It's the truth. And I had a moment where I woke up on day 2 or 3, and there was one of the techs that was sitting in my room, which is because they have to watch you sleep to make sure you don't do anything. And I asked her, you know, because I woke up and couldn't sleep, and because I'm in a weird environment, and I basically asked her if we could have a conversation, and she was like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And I sort of asked her what I should expect while I was here, and what it was like, and I never will forget this. She said to me, she said, "We don't fix people here. I don't know if they told you that. We don't fix people. Like, we keep you stable, and then you go back to wherever." And that was really deflating because I never saw a therapist. Um, I never, like, there were groups, but they were not required. Um, I saw a psychiatrist 2 times in the 9 days that I was there and had my medication adjusted 2 or 3 different times just because. Um, and then I was released home. And the hospital had a step down unit, but as is the case with many people, insurance is a huge issue. So even though my mom had private insurance, I was still a dependent, and we were able to use that because it was out of network, out of state, and all this other stuff. It still ended up costing an arm and a leg, and the step down unit was going to cost even more. And in reality, the step down unit is what I needed, because I never will forget. There was one morning we were doing vitals, and they go through and they check your oxygen and, you know, all your stuff. And because it's also, where I was at is also a detox center, in addition to a psychiatric inpatient facility, which is not uncommon. They also ask you, you know, like, what are you craving, all this kind of stuff, like just random questions. Not random, they're all for testing and tracking purposes, but some of them just seemed ridiculous because I clearly was not there for detox, but they still ask you the detox questions anyway. And I, I think it was maybe the fourth or fifth day that I was there. The nurse who was doing the morning vitals and the questions and stuff, at the end of it, as we were wrapping up before I left the room, she said, "You know, we don't really know why you're here. It doesn't really seem like there's anything wrong with you." And I said, "And that is the exact reason that I'm here. Because I have spent my whole life hiding my pain from the people around me. mental health is more than, I guess when we think of mental health, a lot of people just say, oh, well, just try not feeling that way. Do some yoga, get some sunshine, take some vitamin D, go for a walk. But, like, when you're raised in the environment that I'm raised in, or was raised in, reclaiming your sense of self is really hard. And I had a lot of indecision around making this video because I know that there will be people in my family who watch this that don't agree with my experience, that have actively told me, um, I know what happened, nothing did, and even if it did, I had it worse than you. I have been told that by family members. So for anybody who's ever had their experience invalidated, this is me telling you that it is real. What you experienced is real, and it is not your fault. The reality is that I was raised by two parents who had their own trauma. And it took me a very long time to get to that place because for a very long time I blamed myself. Why don't my parents love me enough to take care of me in the way that I feel like I deserve to be taken care of? Why don't they love me? And what I realize now as an adult is that my parents did love me, but not but. And they showed it in the way that they knew how. I was raised by one parent who had all of their boundaries violated and was abused in pretty much any way that you can imagine. And I had another parent who I think, just based off of knowing my grandparents on that side, grew up in a very you're not good enough kind of environment. And at one point, both of them used substances to cope. However, one parent was able to withdraw, but the other parent continued to be a substance user. In the wake of all of this, I had a parent who was physically and verbally and emotionally abusive and neglectful, and the same at various points was true with both parents. And it hurts to say this because I know that my parents are probably going to watch this and see this, and this is not meant to start a big spiral. This is just talking about where it all came from. I was misdiagnosed for a long time because they told me that I had social anxiety. I think I went over this. Social anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, major depression, major depressive disorder not otherwise specified, bipolar type 2, and then finally, a couple of years ago, I got diagnosed with complex PTSD. And that has been a game changer because at this point, 5 years post hospitalization, but really the last 4 years that I've been working in terms of my mental health since my hospitalization, I've been on 12 different medications. Only one of them worked, and it was around my anxiety, but I finally realized with the amount of trauma that I've been through, there's no way that there's not some traumatic stress involved. And as a mental health professional, I don't know how many of you are mental health professionals, how many of you are in therapy right now thinking about it. There's something called a differential diagnosis. If you're a clinician, you're familiar with this. It's basically, for people who are not clinicians, it's when you sit down and you're like, so we have a couple of different things here that kind of could fit, but we're not entirely sure which is the best match. And it's weird being the patient and also having the education to sit with the other person, whether it was my psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, PMH NP, who was my med manager, or my therapist, which was a social worker as well. Also, if you're a social worker, see a social worker. That's not knocking against LPCs, LMFTs, or psychologists. I just feel like discipline related therapy is really good because that's the modality that you learn how to be a clinician in. And so, in addition to my parents' own issues, I also had a parent that fell deathly ill and was on their deathbed, and that caused a very serious schism in my family because that parent could no longer function on a basic level, and my other parent checked out. So I was, I'm trying to think back on this, I might have the times wrong, but 11, 12, 13-year-old having to take care of a parent. And when I say take care of a parent, I don't mean just like heat up a bowl of soup or wash the dishes or basic chores. I'm talking about like helping this parent to the bathroom, helping this parent to the shower, helping this parent relearn how to read and write, and picking out coloring books in the grocery store and getting crayons so that they can work on their fine motor skills. Home health was not something that was involved when this parent was sick. And even though I have siblings, they have their own lives, and there's a lot of bitterness there, I feel sometimes, about all of this, because I think in my parents' well-intentioned means of, why did you leave your brother to deal with this by himself? Like, why weren't you here? I think that my siblings have internalized that as me blaming them, when I recognize that my siblings have their own issues that they grapple with. They're 8 and 11 years older than me, respectively. So there's a big age gap between what was going on. They had different lives, they were away. And part of the conversation that I've had with my brother, where he expressed a lot of anger, where he's told me that he feels like I blame him for this, because he said, well, I would call and ask, and everybody told me that things were fine and not to worry about it. And I was a child. I can't control conduits of conversation. The only real bitterness that I still have over it is that, like, the adults that were involved, not my siblings, which were also children, in their early 20s at that point in time. The adults, like the absentee other parent, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, like the other family unit that was around me. I have a lot of anger and a lot of hurt towards those people who did not stop to think, I wonder if this might be traumatizing for a young child to have to provide medications and flush a PICC line and learn how to do it, and do it in a way that doesn't hurt the person that's on the receiving end. Um, I have a lot of justifiable anger because I felt abandoned early in my life and that I wasn't good enough. And then to have a parent almost die in front of you and then be responsible for nursing them back to health, like, that is big. And that also caused a huge rift in the relationship that I have with that parent. And it's taken a lot of work on both of our parts to try to get to a place where we feel like we're comfortable or able or want to have those relationships. Because for me, it was, I don't ever want to have a relationship with you because I'm scared to death of losing you. Because I know what it's like to come this close. And to those of you that have lost parents, I am so sorry. I really am. Even if they weren't always good people, it's still a loss. Okay? They were doing the best they could with what they had. And so I completely shut myself off from a relationship with this parent, and things got very tumultuous and difficult and rocky. My parents ended up divorcing a couple of years later when I started high school, separating and then divorcing, because Virginia is archaic like that. You have to be separated for a year if there are children involved, and then you can get a divorce. Don't really agree with that, but that's for a different day. So, yeah, I've been through the ringer. I've been through some shit. Pardon that. That's Grace. She's laying next to me and saw something interesting. So, this is why I wanted to talk about mental health awareness. There is, and I guess this is the final point that I'll make because I know this video is getting a little bit long. There is the assumption, bless you, that people who work mental health, people who are mental health clinicians, people who are credentialed, people who are in practice, are well adjusted, fine, totally know how to handle all of their stuff, and never have any issues ever. And I'm here to let you know that that is a lie. Now, you've probably seen this in a couple of places, but helpers need help too. We are not perfect. We have our own problems. We struggle. We are not well sorted. We get dysregulated and upset the same way that our clients do. It just, we're able to wear a hat and work in a certain level of professionalism to have that. And to be honest, I had a lot of fear about making this just because I am so concerned about what other people think, because a lot of my upbringing was hearing, when people look at you, they judge me. and having an identity, a sense of self outside of that has been really difficult, and it's left me feeling like I have no sense of self because I've been playing to expectations for most of my life, and it got to a point for me where I couldn't do it anymore. And that's why I actually had to leave the agency that I was working at, because I got so burnt out to such a level that I couldn't show up for my patients anymore. It had nothing to do with them, it had nothing to do with the work. It was just the fact of I'm working in a system that charts, any of you that have worked in agencies, electronic medical records are really just glorified cash registers. They are. And one of the things I found out very quickly being a social worker, and those of you that are in mental health will get this, what you can do, what you could do, and what you should do are three things. Three. Get that number right. Three. That very rarely line up. Because there's the policy standard of what you should do, there's what you know you could do, and then there's what the circumstances are allowing you to do in this moment, which is what you can do. Again, that triangle, pick one. And that's the decision that you're having to make again and again and again and again. And seeing people fall through the cracks of systems that are horrendously broken day after day after day. Honestly, doing hospice was way less emotionally taxing on me than doing home health, because if somebody's dying, somebody's dying. And that might sound glib to say. We're not worried about health insurance anymore. We're not worried about the next appointment. We're not worried about things. Get real when people are on hospice. People get perspective on their life. People get perspective on what matters and what doesn't. And it turns out that a lot of the things that we spend a lot of our time focusing on don't matter. They really don't. And that's part of the reason why I'm wearing the shirt that I'm wearing, which I will lift up and show all of it, because I know you can just see make. Well, make what? I wanted to give a quick shout out to Aiden Dowling, and who's on YouTube as Alliance Spears and also on Instagram as well. He has a clothing company called 0.5cc that I super love, support. I think it's great. And he released this line that was around, I am enough, and I saw this shirt and I really loved it, and it says make yourself proud. And I kind of had to put that on before I could make this video, because I had to sit and ask myself, because of the fear. I was scared to death to sit and talk about this, because I was raised in a family culture, not just in my immediate family, but just broader family culture, that you don't talk about hard things. You don't talk about trauma. You don't talk about things that are difficult. And that is how abusive patterns can continue to live, is in fear and shame and secrecy and silence and people not speaking up about what's going on. So the takeaways from all of this are me being emotionally raw and honest with you to let you know that I am a practitioner who gets it. I have my own stuff. Every practitioner you meet will. There are very few people who are completely and totally well-rounded with no edges. And good for them, man. I used to be bitter about those people, but honestly, the more I reflect on my life, sometimes I'm really glad that there are people who really genuinely will never get it. Because when I think back on it, is this really something I want other people to understand? Because that requires them going through this kind of pain, and that's not something that I'm particularly interested in. So, for anybody who's related to me that's watching this is not a personal attack. This is just a discussion of my truth, my reality, and what's going on. If that hit you some kind of way, we can talk about it. I ask for a respectful dialogue. For those of you that don't know me, thanks for being willing to sit down and watch a complete and total stranger to you be vulnerable. It's a lot. It's scary, but I'm learning how to do it and slowly, hopefully, getting better and better at it. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time, because I know we're hitting a half-hour mark right now. Thank you for hanging in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being willing to hear me. If there are things that you have struggled with in your life that you have never felt like you've had permission to speak the truth about, this is me giving you permission to speak your truth, because things don't heal and grow in darkness, only in light. And that light comes from speaking your truth and putting it out in the light of day. So if there's something that you've been holding on to, some pain, some hurt, some injustice, something, this is me giving you permission to talk about it, to let it out. And there are going to be people who get upset, that don't like what you have to say, that are going to invalidate your experience and your identity, and they're going to tell you what your experience was even though they weren't there. You know what happened, and that's really all that matters. Okay? So if you're met with that kind of pushback when you speak your truth, just know that your truth is still your truth, and other people don't get to dictate that. So thank you again to everybody who sat and listened. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate your willingness to accept my vulnerability. If there's anything that you feel like you have not been able to talk about before, please drop a comment, or if you want to send me a message, let me know. If you want a place to sort of put your feelings or put those things, let me know. Disclaimer, this is not a replacement for therapy. I'm not providing free online YouTube therapy. That's not what this is. This is just me sharing my experience. So thank you for taking the time to sit with me. Thank you for listening. And if you liked it, please hit the bell. If you want to subscribe and see more of this, that would be cool too. Let's come here, Boo. Come here. Come here. You're really gonna sit there and look at me like, Grace. Grace, come here. She's gonna stick her head in, but then she won't say hi. Yes. So if you want to see me and this one, please feel free to like, subscribe, hang out. I'm going to be making more videos on YouTube. I'm also on Instagram. If you don't follow me, I'm going to be putting it down in the comments, or not the comments, but the description below as well. But I am on Instagram at ThatPeskySocialWorker, which is the same as my channel name. So if you don't follow me there, please hop along. I update a little more consistently there. I am working on making more YouTube videos, so more to come in the future. But thank you again for your patience, for your listening, for your kindness, for your vulnerability, your openness, and for being willing to take a chance on a random stranger. I hope everybody has a good rest of their day, a good rest of their weekend, and I wish you good mental health. I wish you peace. I wish you love, and I wish you self-forgiveness. See you next time.